And we're live. Okay, so here we are, Wednesday, June 15th in the year 2022. Back from vacation down at the Outer Banks. Had a good time down there with a friend of mine and his family. And as one might expect, I couldn't stay away from politics for long because, after all, it does affect everything we do. So, how does one ignore it? I can't. Maybe you can. Anyway, I started reading a new book this week. I finished one and I posted about it, and I started a new one. And in the first chapter of this new book, I read some stuff that just floored me because it confirms what many of us already knew, even though you and I both get called conspiracy theorists a lot because we say these things, and then people look at you like you're crazy and try to demonize you and marginalize you. And then you find out later that you were absolutely correct. But does anybody ever apologize for calling you those names? Of course not. That would mean that they made a mistake, and they're not going to admit that, are they? Anyway, here's the book. Hold it up so you can see it. America's Secret History by Steve Harris. And it says further how the deep state, the Fed, the JFK, MLK, and RFK assassinations, and much more led to Donald Trump's presidency. Now, you should know that this guy is not writing this book from the standpoint of he's a Trumpster and he likes Trump and he's glad Trump was president, et cetera, et cetera. He's pointing out that there were things that happened in our government, and this goes back to at least the late 19th and early 20th century. Things that happened that created a snowball effect, created more government, bigger government, this elite cabal that rules things, and don't act like you don't know what this is. And then he explains how people eventually, like you and I, we get things like the computer and the internet, and we're able to do a lot more research, and we don't have to depend on the media for our news, which really pisses them off, boy. And we learn things. And because, number one, we're willing to learn things, unlike many of the Marxists in this country. Marxist, communist, leftist, pick one. Anyway, and this would eventually lead to sort of a protest vote, in the sense that here's this guy who's not a politician, who is seen as not part of that cabal. And maybe he is, maybe he isn't. Who knows? We'll find that out eventually. But this led to their vote. Now, I'm going to read to you from the book to set this up. So bear with me. I'll try to do it quickly because I know you don't want to sit here and listen to me read the book, but I want to read this to make sure you understand where this is coming from. And so that the Marxists out there, who again will call us conspiracy theorists, and say we're crazy and we're just making this up, I'm going to give you some details that will allow them to look this up if they wish to. But you and I both know that's not going to happen, right? Easier to just call people names and say they're crazy than to actually look stuff up and run the risk of being proven wrong. All right. The title of this chapter is, Was This the Beginning of the Deep State? In 1953, the House of Representatives Cox Committee was reformed into the Reese Committee, established by House Resolution 561 of the 82nd Congress. House Resolution 561 of the 82nd Congress. Look it up, liberals. To investigate whether tax-exempt organizations were using their funds to support communism. Banker Norman Dodd, D-O-D-D, was selected to lead the investigation and accepted the consultancy as research director for the House of Representatives Special Committee to investigate tax-exempt foundations and comparable organizations. Man, that's a mouthful. The chairman of this panel was Representative Carol Reese, Republican, Tennessee, who decided to focus on the 12 largest foundations, Rockefeller, Ford, Carnegie, etc., since they represented 70% of the assets of all foundations at that time. Renee Wormser, that's Wormser, was hired as counsel on September 1, 1953, and Dodd hired, among others, attorney Catherine Casey as a legal analyst. Wormser was the senior member of the law firm of Miles, Wormser and Cook, and a firsthand witness to the intense and powerful opposition to this investigation that these multi-billion dollar trusts. So it was obvious right from the beginning, these trusts didn't want anybody looking into it. The committee members were virtually hamstrung from the beginning of the investigation. In his 1958 book, Foundations, Their Power and Influence, Wormser states, and this is where I want you to really, really start paying attention here. An unparalleled amount of power is concentrated increasingly in the hands of an interlocking and self-perpetuating group. Unlike the power of corporate management, it is unchecked by stockholders. Unlike the power of government, it is unchecked by the people. Unlike the power of churches, it is unchecked by any firmly established canons of value. When such foundations do good, they justify the tax-exempt status which the people grant them. When they do harm, it can be immense harm. There is virtually no counterforce to oppose them. What do? What do you and I do? We're just regular guys. We're just citizens going to work, going to school, feeding our family. What do? These people are unaccountable. That's the point that's being made. All this money, all this power, and it's unaccountable. All right, so moving on. One might wonder, how would they affect these changes? How would these organizations make the changes they want to see happen? All right. William H. McElhaney II conducted an extensive interview with Norman Dodd for his 1980 book, The Tax-Exempt Foundations. From McElhaney's interview transcript in the minutes about 1911, the trustees raised a question, and they discussed the question, and the question was specific. Is there any means known to man more effective than war, assuming you wish to alter the life of an entire people? And they discussed this, and at the end of a year, they came to the conclusion that there was no more effective means to that end known to man. So then they raised the question, number 2, and the question was, how do we involve the United States in a war? Are you paying attention? And then they raised the question, how do we control the diplomatic machinery of the United States? And the answer came out. We must control the State Department. That's control number 1, State Department. To summarize Dodd's subsequent comments. All right, let me scroll down here. This is regarding World War I. The war was now over. Then the concern became an expression, and as expressed by the trustees, seeing to it that there was no reversion to life in this country as it existed prior to 1914, and they came to the conclusion that to prevent a reversion, they must control education. I'm going to read that to you again because I think that's important. And I think it only confirms what many of us have already known and have been saying for years. And that is that the left in this country, the anti-American left, wants to and has controlled education for decades. All right, let me try this again. The war was now over. Then the concern became, as expressed by the trustees, seeing to it that there was no reversion to life in this country as it existed prior to 1914. And they came to the conclusion that to prevent a reversion, they must control education. I don't know how much more convincing some people need, but I mean, if you aren't convinced already, this should help. The trustees then decided that the key to controlling education is the teaching of American history. Is the teaching of American history. And yet, when you or I or someone we know says, well, that's not right about the Confederacy, or that's not right about World War I, or that's not right about why we got into World War II, we're called crazy people. You're wrong. Why are you saying that stuff? But if you're being taught in public schools that what they're saying is true, most people aren't going to look beyond that. They can't be bothered with it. Well, the school said it, it must be true. All right. The trustees then decided that the key to controlling education is the teaching of American history, but they were unsuccessful in getting historians to commit to this. The Guggenheim, though, agreed to grant scholarships to selected candidates who were going on to graduate degrees, and so it began. All right, so I'm going to stop there because, again, I don't want to bore you to death by reading the whole book. And again, I've gotten through 3 chapters so far. And I started last night. So, but it just jumped out at me. And I hope some of you are going to see this and think, well, maybe I need to look a little deeper into it, especially the leftists out there, the communists. Now, if you're a communist, leftist, Marxist in this country, and you just don't care about America and what it stands for and what it's supposed to be, well, then I guess it makes sense to me that you don't care and you won't look further because you're happy knowing what you know. But if there are some of you who have been lied to, and thus convinced of the lies, and you just don't know any better, but you're willing to, you want to know, and you're willing to look, here's some information for you. Buy the book. You know, you don't have to trust me. You don't have to believe everything I'm telling you. Buy the book, America's Secret History by Steve Harris. And it says secret, but the fact is it's really not secret. It's out there. You just have to be willing to look for it. And many of us are. But we're the ones that are called crazy because we want to know the truth and we're willing to look for the truth. Are you? Do you care? Is individual liberty important to you, or are you just happy being part of the crowd? So anyway, that's the point I wanted to make today. I'm not going to tie up any more of your time. But think about what I just said. If you want to look into it further, then look into it further. I would encourage you to do that. But understand this, that I and others who point these things out to you, you can call us conspiracy theorists if you want. You can call us nuts, crazy, whatever. The fact is, at the end of the day, we've been proven right so many times, and yet you just refuse to accept it. So, time to wake up, folks.